So this is the March 9th meeting of the RTM Planning, Zoning, and Housing Committee. I would, before we get started, I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda to add at the end of the agenda review of the amendments to the light ordinance. I know that came around pretty late and maybe people didn't have a chance to see it, but we did discuss what was coming at the last meeting, so hopefully we can just sort of have a summary of what the changes are and go from there. So if I can have a motion to approve. Dan? Michael, thank you.
He's Michael.
You're okay, we're gonna go. That's how we differentiate each other.
It works for us. We're on all these committees together.
Schools together, this together, District 2 together.
And no one gets it right.
We work next to each other.
Most of them are the opposite.
I never want to be rude and call somebody by their short name if that's not what they want to be called by. All right, so that is great. Thank you all. I guess, and we have that first. So then we have Jeremy Ginsberg with us today, who's the Director of Planning and of Land Use. And he is going to discuss with us the land use budgets, which includes Planning and Zoning Department and Building. And then we'll also be, we will need to be taking action on the proposed adjustments to the land use fee schedule. So do you want to,
Sure.
where do you want to be?
Where's best? I guess I could just sit here and.
I mean, you can, come get a little closer to us. I think
Great,
we're
great.
don't
Well,
mind.
Mike, I make no promises.
You want me to sit at the table?
Yeah, maybe I'll just sit here.
Yeah.
Where's best for the tea? Where would you?
There's right here.
That's a good place for a park.
Great.
Okay.
Well, good evening, everyone. Pleasure to meet you all. As Amy mentioned, I'm Jeremy Ginsberg, Director of Land Use. I've been in the Planning Department now 25, 28 years, quite a while, so it adds up pretty quick.
I can't believe it's been that long.
But here to tell you a little bit about both the planning and zoning budget and building budget. We'll start with planning and zoning. Hopefully, Amy, were you able to email out to folks?
I was, although I should say, and I know I said just jump right into the budget, but maybe, Jeremy, since there are some people that are new to the committee, so you can just do a little bit of sort of.
Background on what we do.
That would be
Sure.
great.
Our office provides staff support for the 4 local land use boards. We have the Planning and Zoning Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals, Environmental Protection Commission, which is basically the wetlands agency in town, and the Architectural Review Board. So you may see on Channel 79, some of the meetings are held here and some are upstairs, but they're all volunteer boards. Planning and Zoning is elected, the others are appointed by the Board of Selectmen. So if you're ever interested in trying something new or different, certainly they're always looking for folks. And those boards are required by state statute. The Architectural Review Board is more of a local board. And they all have different roles in the development and building process. So, for example, the Architectural Review Board looks at signs, awnings, and facade changes for commercial and multifamily. Environmental Protection Commission reviews work in and near wetlands. Zoning Board of Appeals looks at proposals for variances, projects that can't meet the regulations. And Planning and Zoning Commission covers a wide variety of permits and approvals, and I'm sure you've all seen them on TV or familiar with their work. So our staff works closely with them, assists them as needed, but we're also responsible for day-to-day work in the office, answering questions about zoning, what can I do with my property, assisting realtors, et cetera, title searchers, attorneys, and keeps busy. We see about 650 to 700 building permits a year, and for each building permit, there's a precursor, which is a zoning permit. We have to look at everything to make sure it complies with zoning. So for every pool, deck, shed, new house, whatever it might be, it has to come through our office. Someone has to say, yes, it meets zoning, send it through the building, and then the building department looks at it from a, I'll call it, will it fall on your head type standard. Is it designed to the local building code? So it's a pretty hectic office, a lot going on in town, you've all seen it. Commercial, multifamily, single-family residential. So every year we put together a budget. About 75 to 80% of our budget is just personnel, manpower. The people to be there to pick up the phone, answer your question, sit down with you, have a meeting, and help the boards at their meetings. A small part of each budget is everything else. Mailings, advertising, and you saw the various line items. I'll talk about some of the impacts. One of the things that we're right now in the middle of is changing the way we do business, because in the old days, since 1920, if you will, everything's been on paper. Well, what would happen in recent years is we'd have all the paper, and then we just have to scan it. And then it would be computerized. Well, we've decided to go to online permitting, so we don't have to scan things anymore. It comes into us electronically. People type in their applications, they scan them, and they upload. Think of a giant paper clip, you're just paper clipping it, and it's easily accessible not only to the board members, but to members of the general public. So no longer will you have to drive to town hall, look at something, get a copy through a big copy machine, any of that. It's all publicly available at any time, day or night, weekends, evenings, whatever. So we're providing better service because people can access information 24/7, and saving a lot of money because we are no longer getting hard copies and then just scanning them. So some of our budget is skewed that way as well. We, in recent years, have been doing a lot of scanning work, and because we're caught up on scanning, and we won't be doing scanning anymore, you will see some of that starting to come out of the budget, believe it or not.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
Because you do have, it does seem like you've got everything, both building department and zoning, scanned in. Will the historic applications be available online? And I think I can send around to everybody the links so that people can see where everything's available online, which Jeremy was just referring to.
I think they are online.
The historical stuff?
What specifically?
I mean, none of, only active applications can be
Let me check
accessed.
on that. Let me check on that.
I mean, they're available on the computers here,
Right.
but
that could be.
not through Viewpoint. You can, yeah.
Okay. We've only had the system for about a year, so we're still tweaking it, fine tuning it. We do get questions like that we have to say, okay, is that a computer system problem or a permissions problem? So everything is scanned here in the building. The question is, can you do it online? That's a good question. I'll have to check on that. But we always have all the hard copy files, which is super helpful sometimes, just to have it in your hand. Certainly one, as state statutes change. Last year, a state statute changed that requires planning and zoning members and zoning board of appeals members to get 4 hours of training every year. So we've had to put money in our budget for training the members. So many of them will be going to training this Saturday.
So that's,
why.
okay, and then that's training services, okay.
So some of that is for staff who, as you know, in many businesses, like attorneys, you need continuing education credits. That's the same way now for planners, like myself. And if you are a certified floodplain manager, you need ongoing training. So you'll see a line item in the budget for training or conferences and meetings, which will allow us to get up to speed on, which we were talking about before the meeting, changes in state statutes, which are coming through faster than we can get trained on.
So in spite of that, though, the budget hasn't gone up from last year to this year for training.
That's correct. You can see most of the budget is personnel, and in fact, I think for planning and zoning, the rest of the budget is level or down. And it's a very small piece of that.
So the training was started last year, I think, was sort of where that question was coming from.
Correct.
For
So you can see, other than salaries, the budget is down.
Right. Sure, the question I had, and this is, I'm sure it's the same as it's been before, but I'm gonna ask it now anyway. We don't see actual from last year. I mean, were we pretty much on the budget?
Oh, we're out of budget. I was just on the phone with the finance director today about squeezing every last little penny between now and June 30th and making sure you don't go over, because that's her job, and Jack's job to make sure we don't go over. but making sure we have enough to get through, what do
Got
we
it.
figure, about 100 days left.
Thanks.
And then we're gonna talk a little bit about the capital projects as well.
Sure, we have, basically, the big capital project deals with stormwater management manual update and then subsequent change to the zoning regulations. As many of you are familiar with, there's been a lot of concern about flooding and drainage concerns in town through the years. The Planning and Zoning Commission in recent years has become much stricter on drainage requirements for applicants, builders, developers, even homeowners that come in with certain size projects. We've done that for, let's call it 10 years now, and we felt it was an appropriate time to review, relook at what we're doing. Are we choosing the right standards? As technology changes in terms of what size storms we should plan for. I know we've talked about the fact that, are we using the right rain data? Are we using updated information on storms? So this money is twofold. One is to hire a consultant to prepare and update a new stormwater manual, which is used by both Public Works and our office, and then subsequently to update zoning regulations based on that new manual. The budget gets passed, we hope to start that work in July, and it'll probably take 6 to 8 months from the start of the manual to planning and zoning adopting new, stricter drainage requirements.
Are the studies that the town's been doing recently on flooding, I know there's been some downtown, those don't come out of the planning and zoning budget, are those out of a different department?
Those were done out of the Public Works budget. They hired Ty and Bond to look at a number of areas of town. I think Saltbox Lane was one. They looked at Grove Street was one. There were 3 or 4 areas of town that they drilled down into.
Because that was really about the storm water system, so that's why that was Public Works, as opposed to you're looking at the zoning regulations.
We're looking at,
That's the
they're
difference.
looking, if you want to think of, they're looking backwards into terms of, is what's now in the ground, underneath the streets, satisfactory? We're looking going forward, as Darien gets redeveloped, what is the proper standard for builders and developers? Is it a 50-year storm or a 100-year storm? The September 1st storm was 200-year storm. So what is the proper standard? And how many inches of rain should we be looking at? So that's the type of standards we're going to review. And how much new building do you need on your property before that gets triggered? So while it's all great for a developer like Federal Realty who's building out a whole city block, we would all agree that they should put in drainage. But what about a homeowner who's adding a pool or a patio or a deck? At what point should drainage be triggered? And I think that's going to be a very interesting question. Right now, the standard is 1,000 square feet, so 50 by 20, so maybe something a little bigger than this room. But is that giving people too much? Should that number be lower? And I think they're going to spend a lot of time and effort trying to figure out what the right number is.
Jeremy, did you decide on who's going to update that manual?
Right now, we're looking at Ty and Bond because they're very familiar with the town. They've done the studies Amy's referred to. They've been doing a lot of peer reviewing on development applications. We need someone who's familiar with Darien, what's been going on, what our current systems are like. And I think they've done a good job and been well respected on the public works side. And planning and zoning is familiar with their work. And they did the original drainage manual as well.
The consulting services from the regular budget, like above
Sure.
the capital projects, what is that on?
That's an excellent question. That goes really, most of that money is towards our geographic information system. So if you've been online, if you've been on the town website, there's a mini mapping, I'll call it a mapping system called MapGeo, which is updated mapping of the town that's used by all departments. Shows you various parcels, wetlands, whether parcels in the flood zone, gives accurate dimensions of each lot, and with a link to the assessor's information. So it's really used on a day-to-day basis, and we use that to keep all the maps updated. It also helps us create maps for our office, updated zoning maps, updated wetlands maps. So we have a consultant who works for us to do all that mapping. That's almost all the consulting work.
And then the other capital project you have on
The other
there?
capital budget item, replacement building department vehicle, which is pretty self-explanatory.
But
the
you're on the building part, we're on,
Right.
we're still on
But-
zoning.
Plan of conservation and
Yeah.
development with affordable housing plan. The state of Connecticut requires that each community in the state updates their plan of conservation and development every 10 years. So our plan was last done in 2016, which one would say, wow, that's really recent. These plans take about 2.5 to 3 years, and you see we have to start getting money for next year. So we realized that that really should be put in the budget next year. So that's in next year's capital, starting in '24. So we assume that the work will start in '24 and go till '26, which would finish it 10 years after 2016. But at the same time, then the state recently came through with a new state statute that says you also have to do a housing plan every 5 years. So what we're thinking here is just do them both at the same time. Just coordinate it. Don't do them separately. Try to get them on the same track. Our housing plan was just finished a year and a half ago. So in 3 years, 3.5 years, the timing will be perfect. So again, we get a lot of unfunded state mandates. I'm sure you've heard that term a lot relative to how communities do things, but this is a classic. You have to do a town plan every 10 years. Now, as a state, we're requiring you to do a housing plan every 5 years. And a lot of things in the budget are also related to the way state of Connecticut requires you to run the operation. You have to do certain legal advertising in the newspaper. And as you know, Darien only has one newspaper. Their rates have gone up. You can understand why their rates might go up through time, and we have to pay basically whatever they require us to pay.
I think so, there is some pending legislation to move it to online only. So
There is, we'll see if that passes, that would be great for the town, save a lot of money. I don't know how it would do for the Darien Times, but I don't work for them, I work for the Times. So we'll see where that goes, but yeah, that's a common bill that's in the legislature, but we'll see if it gets enough impetus this year. But those are the two capital projects, basically, the stormwater management manual and associated zoning regulation updates, and then starting next year, 2024, starting on the new town plan and affordable housing plan.
And the 75,000 would cover
Cover both,
both plans and it's for both years.
yeah, multiple years.
So, anyone have any other questions on any other line items on the zoning budget in particular? All right. So then the other half, which is the building department budget.
Right, the building budget is very similar in terms of the nature of the budget is 80% manpower. We have 3 full-time building officials who are out every day doing various types of plumbing, electrical, mechanical inspections. You can see that, for example, the Federal Realty Project, we have one inspector that goes out there pretty much twice a week. Every unit, every residential unit needs to be inspected, hundreds of units. If you think about every exit sign, smoke alarm, carbon monoxide, light switches, every last little piece of that has to be checked out for safety reasons. So a lot of time and effort spent on especially those larger projects, but even the smaller projects that every homeowner does has to be inspected as well. So every pool, every deck, every shed, every new house requires the inspector to go out multiple times to check out. The rest of the building department budget is very similar to planning and zoning. There's required training, so there's a budget line item for training and conferences and meetings where the building officials learn more about aspects of the building code that they need to enforce, or the code's changing, they have to learn about what's new in the building code. Certainly, the other item they have in there is scanning, which they used to have a big scanning budget, and it gets smaller and smaller every year, and eventually that scanning budget will go away entirely because online permitting. But in the old days, they would use microfilm, and you'd have a little projector, and those days are long gone. But again, it's 80% of the budget is getting the inspectors, getting them out in the field. What I also didn't realize is that oftentimes they get what they call call-outs. If something happens on a night or a weekend where they need the expertise of a building official, they have to call them out and get paid overtime. So for example, that would include someone drives a car into a building. What do we have to do? Do we have to close the building? Or is the building okay? Is it safe? Those types of questions. Oftentimes if there's a fire, is it safe to move back in the house or not safe? So I never realized that, but they get called out for these types of instances that they need someone in an emergency. So, straightforward budget. I think their budget's actually down or the same as last year. And again, the only increase would be the increase in salaries.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, but other than that, it's overall a decrease.
Can you, well, I don't want to interrupt, but I want to make sure also we talk about a little bit on the revenue side. I think it's easier to talk about revenue for building first and then talk about revenue for planning and zoning and roll into the increase request.
Sure. Relative to the building department, everybody that applies for a building permit, whether you're applying for a deck, shed, pool, whatever it might be, you pay a building permit fee based on the value of the work. It's $10 per 1,000 or something like that, which for a homeowner, not a big deal. But what you find is it adds up throughout the year to millions and millions of dollars because that money is used to offset the cost of operating the department, getting these inspectors out and having them with their vehicles and et cetera, training, et cetera. But there is a lot of work that is done to do the inspection. Someone has to come to your house, oftentimes multiple times. So it is one of the, I'll call it, revenue areas of the town. There's a few departments that generate more revenue than others, and the building department is certainly one of them because of these fees. The fees differ year to year, it depends what's going on. We expect that they will be increased next year, the overall revenue, because of all the building and development going on. I owe the finance director, Jen Charnowski, a memo on Monday in terms of where we think things are going to come out, in terms of predicting revenue, getting that number as accurate as possible. But certainly, for example, if you look at what Federal Realty has done, they basically redeveloped a whole city block, and they brought in, do I have the number here? Do I want to say millions? Maybe that's a little much, but a lot of revenue. So our revenue has gone way up. We don't usually see those size developments. We always see about 30 houses a year get redone. But that type of major redevelopment is going to bring in a lot more revenue than a normal year.
In a big commercial development like that, you get building permit fees sort of when the building goes up and then for each separate, for the apartments being finished and then for each separate commercial fit out, correct?
Absolutely. What they've done is, there's multiple building permits, so they did what we call the vanilla box. If you think just a room with nothing in it, or if you think of all those first floor tenants, retail, restaurants, Federal Realty has built them a vanilla box, 4 walls. The tenant, whatever tenant that is, whatever restaurant or retailer, then goes in and does it the way they want it. So you might see someone who likes smaller areas, more whatever, gold-plated shelves, whatever fix-ups, improvements they're making, and that's a separate permit, and that gets billed separately and inspected separately, of course. So vanilla box doesn't have much to it, but once the tenant comes in with, if you would think of a restaurant, sinks, ovens, whatever other improvements there are, yeah, those have to be inspected. So there are multiple permits, many permits, 20, 30 permits. What do we have here? For each, and each tenant's going to have at least one. The upstairs apartments, they did them as one big permit, many inspections, but when you think of the value, there's a lot of, again, the revenue is based on value, $10 per 1,000.
Where's all that surplus revenue go?
To the general fund. No department gets to keep their money. It all goes to a big pot of money that the Board of Finance has allocated to different line items.
With all these additional sort of buildings and projects, do you guys bring in outside inspectors then, or?
Yes,
how
there
do you
are,
handle it?
absolutely correct. There's what they call third-party inspectors and reviewers. There's some highly technical things that have to be looked at. That'll be done for the schools as well. When you think of some of the nuances of those specialized inspections, oftentimes they'll bring in or get a third party at the applicant's expense to come in and certify certain things. So for example, one thing I didn't know, elevators are done by the state of Connecticut. Town doesn't really have anything to do with the elevators. That's all done at the state, for whatever reason, the state level. So it's, some of these can get pretty complex, especially things we haven't
Imagine a
seen.
restaurant has a lot of codes and things in terms of, yeah.
Right, the health department absolutely does a lot of upfront reviews. What I've learned through the years is what the restaurant equipment you need to provide is related to your menu. So the example I like to use is if you're having luau's and pig roasts, that's different than if you're doing fondue, where there's no cooking in the kitchen, versus someone that's just doing grilling. These are all menu dependent, but they would have different kitchen equipment, different venting. So for example, the melting pot doesn't have venting. They didn't need venting, they weren't cooking. Whereas you might, Shake Shack has a whole different dynamic to it. So it's what you may see, for example, Rico's is about to move into Louis next week. Rico's has pizza ovens. So they have to do their thing, they're doing their fit up, but it's a lot of upfront review by the health department, and then venting, the fire marshal will look at that. So absolutely, it's all very site specific.
What is the correlation, since we're talking about this on an income side, between when the building department issues building permits and when things start to hit the grand list and increasing the
Excellent question.
taxes?
Anthony Homicki, who's the assessor, his job is to prepare a grand list, I think it's for every October 1st. But of course, the state statute say every October 1st. It's impossible for him to look at 7,000 properties all in one day, October 1st. So what he has to do, and this is where the online permitting system helps him, is figure out how much of each project is done on October 1st. What can he bill for? So for example, last October 1st, Federal Realty was not done. Nobody had moved in, but they were about 80% done. Many of the units were, just being painted or just getting some doorknobs put on, or carpeting rolled out, whatever it is. But he has to make that judgment call. What is the value? As you see 100 guys out there working every day, the value theoretically keeps going up and up and up, until finally, once you get a certificate of occupancy, 100%, because people are moving in, and presumably they're starting to collect rent. So,
Do you get challenges to, like, if?
that's an excellent question. The
Yeah.
assessor does get challenges. I just spoke to him the other day about that. He gets, or questions or concern. People, residents like yourself will come in and say, my house has 4 bedrooms, you build me for 5. But
But in
oftentimes-
terms of like estimating how much is complete, it's sort of a judgment call. I imagine that you might.
Definitely is.
the-
What's interesting
The builder's
is-
gonna try to keep his liability down, I imagine.
So what happens is when the permit comes in, and a good example is a builder comes in and builds a house. And he says, because he knows his bill from the building department is going to be based on the value of the house. So we've had builders, the house I'm building is worth $25,000. And of course, the building official's like, not in their end, it isn't. How about 250,000 or 300 or whatever? And so the building official will look at the plans and see if the number's correct. But then what the building official does at the end, after he's walked through and says, oh, I see what you've done here. Those lights, those are not that light, those are really, and the carpet you put in, and those walls, those are gold plated. Yeah, I'm gonna bump it up. You've underestimated the value of what you built, so now you owe us $50,000 to get your CO because you underestimated the value. Most people are pretty good, but the building official does look at every single permit and does make adjustments as necessary as he visits the sites and finds out, did they get it right or did they get it wrong? The value he uses generally now is about $400 a square foot. So if you're building a 2,000 square foot house, $800,000. generally, plus or minus.
But to go back to the percentage completion, who is making, let's say we say Federal Realty is, the whole project's 80% done this October 1st. I mean, hopefully it's more than that, but if we say 80%, who's making that 80% value judgment? Is that the building department or is that the tax assessor?
Entirely the assessor. He'll consult with us, he'll consult with the building official, or oftentimes he goes out. So he might not go out exactly on October 1st, but he has a pretty good sense as these things go. He'll walk through, he'll talk to us, he'll look at the list of inspections. Hey, you've been out there 20 times, they must be getting pretty close. And he'll make a determination. As you've acknowledged, oftentimes people will challenge their assessments. I'm sure you've represented people challenging their assessments. It's too high. And then the
They don't
assessor,
usually challenge that it's too low.
So sometimes the assessor will go out and acknowledge it's too high, but then people have the right to then go to the Board of Assessment Appeals. I think that's 3 townspeople who hear cases up on the first floor there, once a month. I think there's only a certain time of year you can appeal. And they make the final decision. Was the assessor right? Was the assessor wrong? But it's not really the final decision, because then you can then go to court. The
Right.
assessor has told me wonderful tales of sitting before a judge and saying, here's how I came up with my number, it's based on this, this, and this. And then the homeowner would say, but I've hired a separate appraiser, and he comes in with this number, and the town might even hire a third person, and then the judge has to figure it out. Fun times.
How often do you face this kind of challenge every year?
There's a certain times a year that your assessment can be challenged, you can challenge your assessment. I don't know what there's a
You
January,
have to file,
February?
yeah, the grand list comes out in October of every year, and then you have until February 20th generally to file your appeal. And then the Board of Assessment Appeals holds hearings in, late February or in March. They go on, the assessment appeal period goes on longer when it's a revaluation year.
Yes.
Sorry, this is getting way outside of zoning, but since you asked the question, the grand list is the same for 5 years. The grand list isn't the same, but your value is based on a certain year and it stays the same for 5 years. So if you do nothing to your house, it would be, right now, it would be the 2018 value. We're coming up on a revaluation in 2023, so every single property will get reassessed and we'll have a new grand list, but it'll be for everyone.
If you make an improvement to your property,
Yeah.
does it then wait for the 5 years, or does it get
No, that's-
reassessed when you make the
When you get the
improvement?
building
As soon
permit.
as your CO comes out,
Okay,
you have a new value, but it is the value of your house and your improvement as if your improved house existed in 2018.
okay,
If that makes sense.
yeah, does.
So it is kind of interesting to see how it's all interrelated. You start in zoning, you go to building, and then the assessor, and then of course, when the assessor assesses you, you then have to pay your taxes to the tax collector.
So that's how it's
Circle
all
of
sort of
life, I guess.
revenue generating.
So that contractual services line item, just to go back for a minute, it tripled a couple of years ago? And are those the people that you were saying help with the building inspection? It was 7,000 something, and it went up to 24,000.
That would coincide though, Jeremy, with the big projects that are in the Heights and Corbin, that would require more resources, I would think.
Right.
That
You're looking at the building
Contractual
department.
services,
For the building department.
Yeah.
that could be, I'm not positive on what that is.
And then it stayed, that
And
number
that's
stayed up.
That could have been,
But that, yeah, timing wise, in 21, that would be when
So those projects
those
started,
projects
and
were
they would
starting
need
to come
they would need
online.
that level of expertise that wouldn't have been resident here.
could be.
That'd be my guess. When I looked at it, I had the same reaction about the number, and then I looked at the year, and that was what I assumed. Right or wrong, that's what I assumed.
But we can probably get a specific answer
I'll
on
check
that from
on
the
that.
building department.
Yep, I'll check on that.
Because I guess that would be the other question. I mean, it seems like it's a low enough number that probably the answer is no, but is there a need to hire that expertise within the town as opposed to continuing to contract it out? if it's gonna stay that high.
Well, maybe it'll
Probably not.
continue because then Corbin will need to be inspected.
Right.
But yeah, it's.
Okay, I'll get the answer.
So any other questions on the building department revenue or expense side, or budget side?
Is it for next year that you're thinking of inspections where they had to go out, but they've been called out too early, but they're only billed once? It's next year's budget, you're thinking about putting in a rate for required multiple visits because
I don't think it was our department. I know the fire marshal talked about that. I know
it
there's.
was the fire marshal.
I know it
They were
is-
being called out and they weren't ready to be called out, but
It is
they
a-
were only getting to bill one. But it was fire, you're right.
It is an awkward thing because it's an interesting business when a contractor thinks they'll be done with something, they want to schedule and get the building official out there as soon as possible. But of course, the best laid plans, you might think you're going to finish something on Tuesday. Sometimes you're not done on Tuesday, or sometimes it's just not right. The inspector goes, no, it's not right, it's just, yep, then the inspector has to go out a third or fourth time. So I know the fire marshal had that, especially relative to smoke alarms. And I think that was, they were called out a number of times on smoke alarms or whatever that weren't installed properly. It's always the toughest thing. And I understand both perspectives, is if you're a homeowner, you're like, hey, come on out tomorrow, I'll be home Friday, come out Friday. I'm sure the guy will be done by Friday. For whatever reason, it doesn't get done, whether it's weather, whether it's a part, supply chain, whatever it is, building official comes out, nope, you're not done.
Well, sometimes they actually do think they're done, it's not even that they don't think
Right.
they're done, and then the building department's the one that tells them, no, you're not.
Right.
Well, that's their job.
Right, exactly. But I guess the question that, to Mike's point is, should the town be charging for that sort of false alarm visit? As they charge for false alarms, they talk about the
Yeah.
fire department, they charge for false alarms.
I think it's a judgment call if it's excessive, but otherwise, yes.
Well, it's not being proposed right now.
Yeah, so, but I think the
That's
fire marshal.
It's probably more an issue for frequency by certain contractors as opposed to.
Right, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else?
Can I ask him a question off the subject so that he might not have to come back to a future meeting, that he could explain something?
Yeah, but do you want to make sure we go over the fee increases, but
Oh, yeah,
that's the next
it
thing.
relates to the fee issue, so.
Okay, so then let's,
Okay.
what are we, so this is for the zoning department. So I guess we didn't really talk too much about revenue on the zoning department side, so if you want to talk a
So
little
we'll
bit about
talk a
that
little bit about
first.
revenue on the zoning department side. The revenue on the zoning department side is really in two pieces. One is the zoning permits, which are the precursor to the building permits. We just talked about building permits. But the zoning permits, when you come in with your project, whether, as I said, might be something small, shed, deck, pool, new house, house addition, whatever it is, has a value. And we base the value of the permit on the value of your work. It's proportional. So we will spend much more time reviewing someone's house plans than we will their shed plans or their kitchen renovation plans. Things are proportional. The amount of work we put in is proportional to the value of your project usually. So for the past few years, our rates for a zoning permit we've used a three-tiered system. If it's $80,000 or less, it's pretty quick review. We have a very small review fee. For something between $80,000 and $250,000, we have the middle fee. And then anything more than $250,000, that means we're sitting at a table reviewing plans, multiple pages, a lot of work, probably looking at a drainage plan somewhere in there as well. So that's the highest fee. One of the interesting aspects of this is the state of Connecticut requires that communities charge $60 for every permit or application. So we have to pass that on to every applicant, $60. And the state is kind enough to say to us, for your troubles of collecting $58 and shipping it to the state, you can keep 2. So the state gets $58 for doing
Nothing.
nothing. And we get to keep 2. and whatever else we collect. So, yeah, talk about non-funded state mandate. There's another one, the state just gets.
And that's built into the fee, or is that an additional fee?
That's built into the fee. So what we've tried to do is make it clear that, yes, here's your zoning permit fee, it's this plus this. So for a land use application, an application that goes to one of the 4 land use boards, we talked about Architecture Review Board, Environmental Protection Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals, Planning and Zoning Commission, there's separate application fees for the type of application being put forth. Again, the state, kind enough to take $58 out of each one of those, and allows us to keep 2. But what we've done is base those fees on what we believe to be generally the amount of time and effort and work for each type of application. So for example, for the Architecture Review Board to review a sign or awning or facade might be less than for the Planning and Zoning Commission to sit and hear a proposal for a big site plan, a commercial building, for example. So we found if you base the fee on the amount of work, it usually is pretty fair to all involved. So what we found in recent years, though, with inflation, we have to pay numerous out-of-pocket costs. So for example, legal advertising is one. I mentioned earlier we have to publish things in the paper 2 or 3 times for each application. We have to hire a stenographer to be at certain meetings, so we have to pay her to show up and record the meetings. We have to pay for mailings that go out to applicants. The state requires us to send mailings certified return receipt. And back in the day, that was a couple bucks, and now it's closer to $8 or $10 per. If you have to do that, it adds up quickly. So little here, little there, it starts adding up, and we hadn't raised the fees in 4 years. So I felt it was an appropriate time to reevaluate, look at these, and come up with what would be an appropriate increase, generally in the range of 10% or so. The other changes I wanted to make clear is 2 other things. One is the EPC in recent years had a staff inspection fee, a separate fee that if the project gets approved, it would pay for staff to go out and inspect it during the project. And we felt, you know what, for us that's just more of a headache to stop, collect, chase the people down for the money, and remember to collect it. So we said, you know what, just build it into the fee. It's much easier to collect it all up front and not worry about keep going back to people over and over for more fees, more fees, more fees. The other item we wanted to include is in planning and zoning. There's a state requirement that you file a special permit notice in the Darien land records if your special permit gets approved. And similarly, we were spending a lot of time, money, and effort chasing down applicants that would forget to file their paperwork. Very frustrating for us, very frustrating for applicants. And so we said, you know what, we'll just take care of it. Give us the $60 up front, and we will file it. It's easier for us to file it, and we'll take care of it. So those types of efficiency changes we felt were very important for us. So I have this memo dated March 1st. Hopefully that covers everything in here. The explanation of why these are increasing, the state surcharge fee, whatever you want to call it, and the rationale behind each of the changes.
Well, if you do that, if you put them all together in one, will there be transparency and a breakdown for the homeowners or the commercial people as to what that total is?
Right, so for example, if you were to apply for a special permit, the fee is $420, and then the state fee is $60, and the $420 is all-inclusive, you know, the whole public hearing and that aspect. So most applicants, I'd say, are familiar. It's most homeowners hire some kind of experts to go through the process, right? Whether it's an attorney, architect, engineer, builder, to assist them. So it's not something that most homeowners would do. This is more, you know, maybe for wetlands, but not necessarily for planning and zoning. They would hire their experts.
Well, and the EPC piece of it also, is that a set, but you just said you wanted to just fold that in. So if somebody has to pay that fee in addition, is that broken down? Or is that a whole separate line item?
It's not a whole separate line item. It's included.
Yeah, I think the idea is just to charge it, if I can
Once.
speak, charge it as a lump sum,
Right.
and that just includes everything as opposed to charging it out.
Yeah,
Separate.
there's
Right,
nothing
that,
worse
I
than-
get that, but will that be delineated? Will people be
No,
told
because people will
how it's
know,
broken down?
because
Just a lump sum.
it's only being broken down because it had been broken down in the past. Now it's part of the whole service that you're getting. So, no. But I think, but to that point though, I guess my question was, one of the things you talked about is the reporting fee, but if the application is rejected, you're not reporting anything.
We reject very few.
But then,
Oh, well,
I mean, which is just for transparency, since I do work on these in other, I mean, in New Canaan, it's actually frustrating because they collect a $60 fee as a separate check, and then they sit on it and don't do anything with the check, and will return it to you if they don't record, but that can be 6 months that your check is sitting there and it's gone stale. So it's, in some ways, it is actually easier, because we're only talking about, you're talking about a major application, and you're talking about $60, $100. Sometimes it's actually easier to just go ahead and pay it and not get another bill for $60 for a recording or $100 for a site visit or whatever it is.
yeah, people don't want to keep coming, oh, what are you hitting me up for now? This way, it's all up front. You pay once.
There's
Yeah.
no surprises later on, like, oh.
Yeah, the builders or the homeowners, at least they get a sense up front. This is it, right? Yep, this is all, and they can count that.
As long as they know what they're paying for.
Absolutely. So these state statutes and town code require that these fees get reviewed and acted upon by the RTM. So I think we're on for the 20th is my understanding. And it's a Monday night coming up, and there'll be a vote on whether to go ahead with this proposal.
I don't want to interrupt, but for two things. First of all, this is all itemized in Appendix B in the town ordinances. So if anybody actually wanted to go into that and read it, it is there. But number two, we have to do it at this March meeting because the Board of Finance will be voting on their budget the first week in April, and these fees are included in the fiscal year '24 budget.
Right, so that's why it was important for me to get this to the RTM, because if this doesn't pass, the Board of Finance is gonna start pulling money. It's like pulling a thread.
Yep.
This will come out, and then,
So then we'd have to pass it again, and then during budget night, which is already too long, F&B would have to add it back in.
So you mean you're anticipating what the revenue is coming in from P and Z to you based on these fees and an approximate number of applications or
They have-
whatever? And then they have a certain,
yes.
okay,
Yeah, they've already done that with Jen, Kate,
all right.
and that's already in the budget that we've seen from the town side.
But,
Amy,
but,
well, I'm sorry.
okay.
No, I was just, go ahead, keep going.
Well, I was just gonna say, but to answer Priscilla's question, it isn't broken out
Yeah.
to the level
No.
that Jeremy just explained it anywhere, but I think no one's, I hate to say this, but I don't think anyone's gonna notice, because you only know because it was broken out before, now it's just the full fee.
Now it's just a number and a list of services.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a good
So
way to put
people
it.
don't-
Yeah.
Which is
If you've never done it before, you don't care.
Right.
Yeah.
So are you looking for a motion for us to support this? Or what would you like to do tonight?
Yes, but I was gonna wait until we see if we had any other questions about it first. Was there anything, and we sort of jumped in on you, was there anything
No,
else
it's
you wanted
okay, I
to
think
say
I
about
covered
it?
everything, again, we look at these every few years, to be fair to everyone, so what we find is costs have certainly gone up in a number of items through the years, so it's an appropriate time. I was surprised on the amount for a certified return receipt. When they told me how much those were, I couldn't believe how much those were. But again, you look at the post office, they need to get their part of flesh.
Is there ever a state of the world where the numbers go back down?
Well, again, it's based on the Darien Times, what they charge us for advertising. As Amy mentioned, if the state statute changes and allows online advertising, that would be possibly an opportunity in the future where you could say, hey, that's a big chunk of money we don't have to bill developers for, and builders and whatever. So that might be a chance going forward. Or if the state no longer says that you have to legally send approval certified return receipt. That's a state requirement, that's not a town requirement. So why the state makes you do that?
What online database or whatever would you publish that if you're not doing it with?
We would do it with the town website, I'm sure.
Oh, okay. It just has to be legally a public announcement whenever there's,
Well, right now it
Right now.
has to be done in the paper, in
Okay.
a local newspaper. So whether it's Stanford Advocate, Darien Times,
right.
you gotta pay them.
Mhm.
If it were to be only online, costs us $0.
Right.
So we would say,
And similarly, the certified mailings are done because everybody gets it by email
right,
4
we
or
send,
5 days before they get the certified mail letter.
yeah, it's funny, through the years, the expectations have increased. So in the old days, you get your approval letter a week later, you're plenty happy when it shows up a week later. Now, if you don't get it the next morning by 10 o'clock, our phone rings. Where's my letter? Well, the meeting just broke up at 11. Come on. So the expectations are changing. People expect it by email.
Yeah.
All the certifieds people don't sign for them, they get sent back to us. It's a waste of money. But we have to do it.
Amy, can I ask Jeremy a question, if you don't mind? Sure. One time when you changed fees a while ago, you showed up at F&B and you were using these sheets that had all these individual costs on it. So, like, you incorporate the estimated cost of personnel, you include the estimated cost for our systems to record this. I joke, but Jeremy includes paperclips. So all these fees are broken down, and the way I described it after looking at this and spending that session with Jeremy does the equivalent, I'd like to say, of McKinsey, although McKinsey prices for what the market bears. Jeremy's analysis is like reading a McKinsey analysis on each of these fees. So I'm assuming
Right.
they
That's a good
use
point,
the
Jack.
same
What
practice.
I think what Jack's referring to is when you say, oh, it's $700 for a variance, that seems like a lot of money. Why is it $700? You say, okay, well, that's a good question. So let's look at the amount of staff time. Usually a secretary has to take it in, review it, make sure it's complete, organize, whatever it is. And so there's secretary time. And then the staff person looks at it, makes sure it's complete, reaches out to the applicant, oh, you're missing a whatever. So there's staff hours, how much does the staff bill out for? And then as I said, you build in the mailings, the advertising, legal notices, stenographer, the certified mail return receipt, and you start itemizing it, as Jack acknowledged, you add up at the end, you're like, yeah, basically $700 is a reasonable cost these days of that service.
Jeremy, I just wanted to ask about the computer software maintenance.
Sure.
I assume that that's mostly like licensing. Annual
Exactly
licensing.
right.
How is the software? Like, is this something that you're going to need to be upgrading? Is it like Southwest Airlines grade software, or is it?
It's a great
something
question.
modern?
We, about 3-4 years ago, we started looking at new software. Again, the technology's changing, so when you talk about online permitting, there's a lot of new products out there, a lot of companies out there. So we had a system called CityView, and it was okay. It wasn't really friendly for the public. It's something that the public could not access. Whether attorney, homeowner, engineer, you had no ability to see what was going on. So we wanted something a little more interactive, and we wanted the ability for people to upload the files, because it would save us all the money with scanning. What was happening with CityView, it was great for us to manage our information, but it was still coming in like this, and then we'd have to pay someone to scan it in one at a time. And there was no interaction with the public. So we found this system, it's called OpenGov, and it's very much related to what the finance department, and their group uses, is also OpenGov. They use it for the budgeting aspect. So we had a lot of demos, we had a lot of departments come in and look at the demo, and what they're able to do, one reason we chose them, is they're able to be very specific to customize our workflows. The way we do things in Darien is different than Greenwich and New Canaan, and very different from, say, Tolland, Union, Danbury. Every town does things a little different. Allows us to have staff look at things at the same time. Allows people to see kind of where they are in this. Right? So much more interactive, much easier for people to see what's going on. Able to take all our historic documents and integrate those, except what Amy mentioned earlier, which I didn't look into. And very few complaints. The other thing it allowed us to do is take in credit card payments, which some people like, some people don't, but whatever. Some people still come to us with checks. That's okay too. But there were a lot of advantages. We were expecting a lot of complaints when we first started in September of '21. Maybe there's been one complaint in a year, so I see that as a big win. And more communities are going to it, that type of online permitting. What we also find is it will start getting the boards away from paper. So if you've seen an architecture review board meeting, watch them on channel 79, you'll see that they don't have this in front of them anymore. They all have little iPads, and then someone will present on the big screen right over there, and it's all electronic. So we save thousands of dollars of applicants' money. Instead of all their engineers coming up with big plans, they just upload it and make just one copy instead of 15.
Also better for the environment.
Better for the environment, no doubt about that. So Environmental Protection Commission is working on electronic packets, planning and zoning in the next couple months, ZBA, such that there'd be a lot less paper. So that's a good thing. So from a variety of aspects, it's been a big win for us as a staff. I think it's super helpful to the public. And the biggest benefit, I think, if you're a builder or contractor, you don't want to be sitting in this building. It means you're not working. So it allows them to submit materials, nights, weekends, holidays. You know, we're town hall, so we get every holiday off, right? And we don't work Fridays, we work longer during the week. So the builders, when we come in Monday, there's no long line at the door with people standing in line. It's all in the computer already, just waiting for us to come in and sitting there. It also allows us to do work while we're not in the building. So, you know, for example, during COVID, if you're home with COVID, you can still log in and check. Now, check in and you can see what plans are coming in. So, from that standpoint, it's a lot of benefits. It's just takes some getting used to looking at big plans on a small screen. Sometimes we do have to come into a room like this and say, okay, or ask the applicant, can you give us a big plan? You're not going to look at something like this, and take out the magnifying glass. So there are occasions when we have to do that, or still sit down with the applicant the old-fashioned way. The ones we looked at recently that we've needed hard copies are the 3 schools. Hinley, Holmes, and Royal. Those are pretty complex plans. You know, get the big sheets out and start looking at the sheets. But, you know, 30% of the plans we look at are bathroom renovations, kitchen renovations, decks, sheds, internal stuff that we don't need. Homeowners giving us lots and lots of copies. So instead of getting hard copy that we scan in anyways and throw away the hard copy, no hard copies. So the software's been great. We do have to give them a maintenance fee every year. Gives us upgrades, gives us a little support, the help desk, of course. You know. So it's been a big win for us. Very successful.
If I might actually confirm something else. When I first started in F&B, I looked at our fees and tried to compare them to Greenwich's and Canaan's. That is one of the most useless things I've ever tried to do. Because every town calls these things by different names. It includes different services. Is that still correct, Jeremy? So it's like you can't do these comparisons.
I can't figure out what these other towns do. Amy, you've seen, as you said, New Canaan's just, we're very similar to, Darien and New Canaan, similar, they do
yeah.
it differently.
New Canaan, you have to give 4 different checks in, even though they're all made out to the same person. And like I said, and then there's that $160 check that they wait until it goes stale and they complain that they can't use it because now it's gone stale. Or they add 2 pages onto their resolution and I have to bring up a check for $10, which is really fun.
So that's why I was saying, how Jeremy calculates the fees, don't bother looking at the other towns and see what they
Yeah,
are.
it's, Greenwich is traditionally known to be on the higher end,
Correct.
but again, what I look at is, what does it cost us in Darien to do the job? I don't know what town, presumably other towns have similar costs. To send a piece of mail costs the same everywhere, but they might get a better deal on advertising than we do. Maybe their stenographer doesn't charge as much, maybe they charge more, I don't know. So, we found that this is a pretty fair system that we're using now, and cautiously increasing it every few years to reflect what's going on. I think that's what we're going to the RTM with, is a very conservative, it's about a 10% increase, nothing crazy, but it does cover a lot of those out-of-pocket costs, which are very clear to us, have been going up.
It's not this isn't recurring annual, it's like.
It's not annual, it's every 3-4 years. I think the last time I came was 2019, and before that might have been 2016 or something like that. So it's every 3-4 years where you say, you know what, some of these things have gone up, and it gives us a chance to reevaluate some of the efficiencies as well.
So I think, any other questions from anyone? So I think we need to have 3 votes, one of which is to approve the amendments to the fees. The next is, and then we need to approve recommending the budget for planning and zoning department and the budget for the building department, including the capital requests. So does anyone, I guess we'll start with the first, does anyone want to make a motion to approve the fee changes proposed by Jeremy?
I'll move that.
Any second?
Second.
Kirk? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
And then a motion to recommend the planning and zoning budget as part of the budget process. All right, Mike, we'll take Mike this time. We have a second?
I'll do the second again.
Got Kirk again. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, and then a motion to recommend the building department budget. Dan, all right. And then Mike goes there. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, that's great.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Did you want to talk about developments or anything else?
So I guess, let me ask a question of the group. We have, the other thing we need to do tonight is, Frank's here to talk with us about the blight ordinance. I don't think that'll take us too long, but since we have Jeremy, if people want to get a little bit of an update on where we are with the major developments in town, I just don't want the evening to go on too long. Is everyone?
I'd love to hear
Can I
something.
ask a quick question first? The OPC meeting, they talked about the governor being able to have restaurants, getting the outdoor space expires, the COVID exemption expires April 1st.
That's correct.
And what I understood was if the restaurant was currently using town spaces for the additional space, they would have to enter into a lease with the town, which would then have to be approved by the RTM?
That's correct. So if you think of all the restaurants in Darien, all the places you've eaten, outside, there were 2 within the past few years that were on town property, which is Bodega Taco and the Goose, which were both in the Center Street parking lot. And I've talked to the town administrator, Kate Bush, about the fact that, number one, if people want to use town property consistently, that there would be a lease, and that any leases need to get reviewed and approved by the RTM. So her inclination was, and this is a nice segue, in 2023, there's a lot going on downtown and a lot of demand for parking. So she was a little hesitant to approve that for 2023, or have the selectmen approve it. And so we might not see that in '23, which would give them time to put together a proposal to go to the RTM. If it could be something permanent or annual, and that would have to be another question is it gonna be seasonal, or is it gonna be up year round? It would have to go to the Architecture Review Board and Planning and Zoning. So it's gonna take a while for that to.
So would that mean for '23, Jeremy, that those two restaurants would not have outdoor space until this can be figured out?
That's correct. The Goose does have a little bit of outdoor space right on the side of
On
the
the
building.
side.
Um,
But the big space in the back, they would not have in
Because
'23
that's town property.
until such time as.
When I
this is
spoke to the
25.
owner, he's like, but everyone else has it. I said, well, you're welcome to put it on your property, but that's our property. And so the town,
That-
again,
They had a
leases go to the
particular- In the
RTM.
back, they had a particularly large amount of space too.
Yeah.
So,
I'm not saying it's good or bad, just
Yeah.
an observation.
but it's kind of interesting that, you're right, the governor's order, it expires in a few weeks. So,
But do sidewalks count, like the Sugar Bowl or now the club had it outside, 1020
Right,
Post
certain-
had it outside?
certain,
sidewalk?
certain restaurants have received approvals, but what we're planning and zoning is likely to see is a number of people coming back. So for example, Darien Diner had a little tent on the side of the building. So that would need to come back to planning and zoning, for sure.
But there's two different pieces, there's,
But
yeah.
that's
Yeah,
not
but
town
that
property.
wouldn't come
Yeah.
out.
There's planning and
Yeah.
zoning approval, which doesn't come to
Yeah.
us, and then if they're actually on town property,
Right.
which goes to the RTM, and I think the
Sidewalk
issue
is
is,
town
well, that,
property, right?
sometimes.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
not entirely clear, if you're walking down the sidewalk, exactly where the property line is. So I think that's the question, are those like chairs that are right against the building at, where the old Sugar Bowl was, there's some at 1020 as well. Is that town property or is that the restaurant's
You have to
property?
look at the property, you have to look at the site plan. to
Right,
know
well,
that.
but Jeremy should know if they're on town property or not, I'm asking him.
Like Sana, I assume is on their own property, because Sana's is pulled back from the
On the
sidewalk.
sidewalk, okay.
I think the Sugar Bowl had, let's call it half and half. 1020s might be on David's property because the building's a little set back. I'd have to check those. But like Cafe Nero might be okay.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
always been there, that was
That's like
their.
Sana.
Bodega has a couple at their window.
Yeah,
Right
in the
there.
front, which might be okay.
So, yeah, so projects.
Yes. So we'll start with the Corbin District project downtown. That's being, you've probably read the paper, David Genovese is starting in on that. What's called Phase 1 is nearly complete. It's 3 separate buildings, one all the way, I'll call it at the corner of Corbin and Old Kings Highway, where Tibbetts Real Estate used to be. That's gonna be, I think, half of that space will be a dry cleaner and the other half will be a retail space. Then you have the middle building, which is, I think it's called 15 Corbin Drive, which will be, I think Compass Real Estate will be going in there, and a number of retailers, including but not limited to Darien Toy Box, will end up going in that building.
They have little signs on the doors as you walk down, where, like, kind of who's earmarked for where.
Yes. Hopefully it won't change too much between now and then, but I think what David's trying to do is take people he already has and move them across the
Yeah.
street. So I'm sure there'll be a day, in a month or two from now, you'll see people walking across the street with their stuff. The big one is Bank of America, of course. They're moving from across from the sports shop down to take that visible corner spot. They hope to move in on or about April 1st. They're very excited. I think it's a little after, but of course they think it's a little before. I'm sure the building official will be out on the 31st of March.
Very soon.
So look at that. So Barrett Bookstore is also, I think, in that, behind the back of that building. So that's gonna be exciting, because once those tenants all move out of the Corbin block, you can see the post office was demolished, the other buildings will be demolished as well. So that will create quite the hole in the ground for a while. It will be quite a spectacle, because you're gonna see hundreds of construction vehicles out there all. And if you go out there today, you'll see 30 or 40 or 50, you'll see twice as many, and you'll see three or four building foundations start to go in, kind of give you the idea of what's coming. It'll be out there working on phase 2 for at least a couple of years. So it's going to be a little awkward to have this big vacant space for a while, but
And on that side, there's gonna be underground parking.
there is. Actually, on the Corbin side, I think there's a little bit. It's not very clear where it is yet, but I think once this gets finished out, it'll be clear between the two buildings at the end of Corbin, there's some underground parking. I
Is
think more so for the employees.
like a traffic study or something? I'm on Edgerton, so of course I worry about all the new incoming cars there. Is there somewhere where I can look at like, what is the town doing to accommodate the new?
Well, certainly there were a number of parking studies done. At the time, we hired an outside peer reviewer to check the work. And again, David's project, because it's on Boston Post Road, was also reviewed by the state of Connecticut.
Okay.
So as you can see, and it's just coming into fruition now, some of the improvements he's making to Corbin Drive. Kind of some widening a little bit, putting a new curb, parallel parking.
But not even just parking, but just the flow of traffic is
Flow
going
of
to
traffic.
change.
I know when we talk about Federal Realty, they put in some road improvements, which Public Works is working with them on.
Right.
Of course, the town for many years has had the project at Norotan and West, which will be finishing up in about 30 to 40 days. The final new traffic light going in, the widening there, new left turn lanes, that will work better than it has in the history of the town. Yes.
Just a question on the other side of Corbin, will the, 3 questions. Will the buildings be as tall
Taller, they will be taller,
as the ones on the other side?
taller.
Isn't it 30 feet, or is that, are they allowed to go higher?
Well-
They seem very high to me.
Yeah,
And the next question is, will the post office be returning to that
the
location?
post office will not be returning. Originally, David Genovese thought about that possibility. It's hopeful that the post office will move to a space in Goodwives.
Oh, okay. And then the existing parking lot in the back, will that remain, that space?
It's tough to describe. I think what David's doing, if you think of buildings framing the street, so have an entrance from the post road, kind of across from the sport shop, you'll be able to get into the development. You'll have 2 exits on Corbin, and as you go back off the post road, buildings will be about the same size as 1020 Post or the Bank of America building. But as you get further back, the buildings will get taller. So when you drive on... Closer to the highway. So right now, when you're on I-95, and you look down,
Yeah.
you look down at the roofs of the buildings. In 3 years from now, when you drive down I-95, you will be looking into the windows of apartment dwellers or condo owners. I'm sorry?
Which overlay zone is the Corbin District?
CBD Corbin sub-area.
And then,
And then we'll go to Federal Realty. They've been at this since 2016, 2017. So 7 years, they're going to be done. As I said, the residential are all done. They're leasing them in both buildings. I think the first building's entirely leased. Right now, they're working with their commercial tenants, retail, restaurants, personal service uses. So,
they're fully leased, they're just working on fit outs, or are they still?
no, they still got a few spaces left. David is almost fully leased, but Federal's working with they've got some spaces left.
Any whispers of another grocery going in there, or?
Probably not. I did speak to Patrick McMahon, Senior Vice President. You know, they spent a lot of time trying to work with Stop and Shop and see if Stop and Shop wanted.
Well, there's that one space next to the loading dock, and I keep hoping there's like
Yeah, I think
fresh
they're
market.
hoping to. He was hopeful too. because That's easy for them. It takes up a lot of space, so that's
Yeah.
really easy.
Yeah.
But what they do have is a lot of restaurants, which gives folks a lot of opportunities that they didn't have because there was never a restaurant in that block. The Walgreens is much better. I don't know how many of you went to the old Walgreens. The new one is a huge improvement. So what do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll have an ice cream shop, we'll have a coffee shop, Gregory's Coffee. I expect May or June on that. But a lot of new things, new opportunities, retail, personal service, nail salon, cosmetic aesthetics, health club, solid core. So you'll see those opening up April, May, June, I would guess. Probably not much.
Total people and total number of restaurants that are going to be coming.
Well, right now, they have, let's count the restaurants. Pizzeria Motown, Sweet Green.
The paper said the other day the 3 complexes had 30 restaurants and 8 salons.
30
So between the 3 of them.
30
Between
restaurants.
Palmer's, Federated, and
30 restaurants, 8 salons.
Patch.
No, heaps, I can see that.
There's, I think there's 2 full service, so it's gonna be Seymour's and Malto. And then there's Naya, Sweet Green, Van Leeuwen,
Yeah.
Gregory's,
Naya's, the Mediterranean restaurant, Sweet Green.
yeah, Oath Pizza.
Just in the story you sent us.
How many restaurants are you in today?
More than you think.
That's my answer as well. It's always more
The
than
health
saying.
department, the health department inspects every restaurant. I don't want to say 100, but there's more than when they told me the number, I couldn't believe the number.
Because remember, you're thinking about like full-service restaurants, I mean, when we're counting these up, we're also
Well, it's
counting
like
up
Uncle's
these-
Deli, is that a restaurant?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's,
But-
yeah,
The health
Places
department
that
also,
serve
food
food.
establishment.
the health department also has to inspect every country club, every place that serves food. Tokenie Club, they have to inspect the Tokenie Club. Every 3 country clubs, Middlesex Club, if they serve food, the concession stand. So they do a lot of, so the number adds up pretty quick. But every deli, think of every place, when you drive down the poster, all the way from Bertucci's, one end, all the way to Giovanni's there at the other end, and everywhere in between.
To put it into perspective, the health department had to hire, which you'll hear in the budget, an additional health inspector because all of the restaurants and the other salons that are.
But what's fascinating to me is related to that when we see all these new houses come in with the big Viking stoves, you're like, I bet you they're not using, I bet you they're all going out to eat. But, yeah,
Well, not yet, maybe when we have 30 more options.
Until we can't have gas stoves any longer.
Yeah, there you go. And then,
so
Where-
Federal
yeah.
Realty's just finishing up, but they'll be out there till June, is from what I'm hearing, is assisting with the tenant fit-ups. So you'll see a lot more, the finishing touches type thing, the plaza, the pedestrian access ways, the road improvements, et cetera, et cetera. So that's finishing up. The Ronade Shopping Center is the big news. You can see that is, so from the press release, John and Joe Vaccaro have taken over the project. They will be demoing this month. So probably starting next week, you'll see those buildings disappear. I would expect it's going to take a couple weeks. They've been around for 50 years, 60 years, and then they're going to start constructing the buildings, which will take, I've been guessing, at least 2 years to get that up and running, with their associated road improvements, parking improvements, landscaping improvements, the big
Water
challenge.
drainage.
A lot of drainage as well. Of course, what's interesting about their project was none of their water flows towards the Caballas. Their water flows the other way.
It goes into Edgerton, into my yard.
So they're picking up where the last, where the Palm, whoever left off, they're not coming into the whole new design.
No, they got all their necessary approvals. They're good to go.
So they're going with the,
Same
They were-
same
So-
tenants.
Some reason told me when we met with you last year, I thought it was just the Goddard School going in there, but then from the press release, it's the school and it's other establishments.
They did get, the Goddard School is their anchor tenant, and certainly they got a certain amount of retail and restaurant. John Vaccaro has not told me about any of his tenants. I don't even know if he's started talking about specific tenants, but they do have a certain amount of each allocated, if you will.
So the design is the same, or are they adding these extra buildings on for the,
they were on before.
they were on there
They were
before?
on there before. So, John and his son have a long track record of development in Darien. Most recently, the 2 projects they've done is the back of the movie theater, putting in those Laurent lighting, La Taqueria, and the third tenant.
The, Kennedy's moved over
Kennedy's,
there, but it's
yes.
not Kennedy's anymore.
So-
Rudy's.
Yes, yes, yes.
Rudy's, that's right.
And he did the project at the corner of Dickinson and Post, which is gonna be dairy and kitchen, and then this, it's not Moody's, it's called something, and they'll be open soon. And they've done
They did the Bruce.
Danny's
building also.
Bicycles and
Yeah, Bruce
Bruce.
and Danny's.
So
Yeah, and they did the Michelli building, over, which used to be the sewing machine shop, which is now Orange Theory.
Yeah.
So they've done quite a few buildings in Darien,
Done a good job.
and they've done buildings down in town.
Is
so.
there any indication of them buying that lot of the house that was just demolished? Because I know there was talk about that for Goddard for like pickup and drop off.
It's a good question. That house is now owned by somebody else, and those people talked to the Palmers, and that lot is zoned residential. And that would be up to the Vacaros to go ahead and purchase it and incorporate it as part of their project. Of course, if you're the Vacaros, you already have an approved project, and you
Right.
already have plans.
Yeah.
Why would you want to buy it and go back to planning and zoning and then redesign the whole thing?
Well, I wouldn't.
Right. So I don't know what's gonna happen, that's an excellent question, and a lot of people ask me that same question. There's certainly a benefit to them, they would get the most benefit out of that, but whether they do or not, I don't know. So it's gonna be interesting to see that going forward. Do they have a need for extra something, access space, open space, whatever it is, or
Or does it
Leave it
leave
where
it
it is.
house there?
building a house there? I don't know.
Yeah, I have a question. With so many new developments and lots of family moving here, do we have enough space in school?
We do have enough space in the schools. In fact, the Board of Ed specifically said that recently. That the nature of what's being built is not bringing a lot of families. So when you look at, I spoke to Patrick McMahon last week, it's very, very surprisingly few. Now, when they came to planning and zoning, they came with a number, whatever it was, and what they are finding is that number is pretty much on point. A lot of folks that move here are already in Darien. Sometimes it's a divorce situation, for example, that the kids will split time between that and whatever. Oftentimes, people downsizing or trying out Darien before they buy a house. They're 1 and 2 bedrooms, they're not 3 or 4 bedroom apartments. And same with the Vaccaro. Vaccaro has a few 3 bedrooms, but it's not a lot of school children.
But if you're downsizing and your house is gonna be for sale, which is gonna bring
Could.
children in,
But elsewhere in town.
Yeah.
you're just transferring where they.
But if you're divorced, it's
Right, yeah.
0.
Well, it's also rentals and not condos, so people are renting, right? Or are they?
Both.
Oh, it is?
There are some, yeah. Yeah, I will say that the school, which typically only does their estimates on what our children are gonna be in the growth and birth rate and everything else, has started to do that study more often, just so that they, as things are going, they can always refine that. And if you ever want to find something to go to sleep with, listen to that report. You've got about 15 minutes and it's done.
We are in constant contact with the Board of Ed. They ask us for the numbers every year. How many units, when are they gonna be built, et cetera. So they have a very good understanding of what's going on.
So, any other questions for Jeremy while we have him here? All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Very nice.
I'll let these gentlemen take it from here.
Do you want me to?
Are you up or?
No, I came here to listen to Jeremy, so I can tell the committee, watch this meeting.
May I join you?
Yes, please. Yeah. So I'll just, Frank, I'm just gonna introduce since you weren't at our last meeting. So, as you all recall, at our last meeting, George Riley came and spoke to us, and George is the chair of the Blight Review Board, Blight Review Board, yeah. And one of the things that we discussed at that time was what we were anticipating might be coming down the road, which was amendments to the existing blight ordinance. to add an ability to look at commercial. So Frank's group has drafted a new ordinance, which I emailed around to you shortly before this meeting. It's
Minutes before the meeting.
minutes before the meeting.
Never asked them to go.
And we did, well, it's,
It's in your government account.
I don't have it.
I can say, I can tell you, here, you can look at it on my computer. It's pretty unexciting, but do you want to just explain what the changes are, and then we can discuss a little bit more about
I
why?
wouldn't blame you for being on. First of all, I'm glad that George had a chance to talk to you all, and nothing's changed. And I wouldn't be surprised if you're underwhelmed at the number of changes that are in your file. What you have in your email, and I'm sure that Krista will send out next day or so, is a 8-page copy of the 2016 ordinance that established residential blight regulations. And we were apprehensive at the beginning that there would be a rewrite or perhaps another document needed. It turned out not to be the case. The criteria for defining blight, which is 12 items, which you have to have 2, was found to satisfy the commercial requirement. We did not have to add anything to those requirements. If there's a problem, it can be defined. And then we were concerned about the fine that would be assessed after they've gone through all the reviews. It's a very orderly process of check, stop. And some people may complain that it takes too long, but other people are appreciative that the owners are given ample opportunity to resolve their problems. But then, at the end of the road, they are fined up to $100 a day. There was a move to have that be higher for commercial establishments, but in view of keeping the ordinance simple and equitable, or at least appropriate to both situations. So that fell away. So the criteria fell away, that fell away, and then we also had met with the Blight Prevention Board twice to ask that if they had any corrections that they'd like to put into the original ordinance, because we all pass an ordinance and then walk away from it, and they have to live with it. They did not come up with any changes. So when you have a chance to look at this, there are 5 changes on page 1, page 6, and page 7. Very minor changes. And there we are.
Yeah,
very simple.
Yeah, it's basically just adding anytime you have, residential, it's adding and commercial, multiple areas specifically. So I think, the question, before us is if we want to recommend this change. And so I think, I don't know if we want to sort of go back, because we did sort of talk about the why when we had George here, which was that, there are commercial properties that they would like to, they think that they've received complaints on and might want to have an ability to review in the same way that they've been reviewing the residential. I will say one of the things that was brought up at our last meeting was the question of whether or not the authorizing statute allowed this. And I believe we'll have Wayne Fox, right, we'll talk at the RTM meeting, Frank, is that the plan? He has, town attorney has looked at it and feels that yes, we can add commercial, despite the fact that there is pending legislation specifically to allow the addition of commercial to blight ordinances, but
In Hartford?
they're pending in Hartford,
It
yes.
is pending, okay.
I'm sorry?
I was gonna say that it's pending, right?
It's pending, yeah,
Okay.
sorry, I was sort of shorthanded that. So currently, there's been proposed legislation to change the authorizing statute to specifically include commercial in the statute that says towns can have residential blight ordinances. But based on the research that Wayne has done, and I'll let him give his analysis, he feels that we can, regardless of what happens with that legislation, because who the heck knows what's gonna happen with that legislation, he feels that we can add commercial at this time. Yeah. That's the pending
Referring
legislation.
to House Bill 5099.
Yeah.
5099 is like 2 paragraphs.
Yeah, that's the one to add.
Placeholders. Whether, from people who've been watching what goes on in Hartford, there's no assurance that it'll come up. And there's also no assurance that it will be passed in its simplicity. So what Wayne has said that if it does pass, and if it provides a better shelter or safe harbor for this type of legislation that we're anticipating, that it will be simple for us to go back and amend our ordinance to recognize what Hartford has.
And I think.
But it's not likely.
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
What's
just-
the rationale if it doesn't pass that we can still do it?
That's I'd rather have Wayne give his
Okay.
research on that, but, well, I mean, I guess I should talk about it because we're being asked to report on it, but basically he's done, looked at case law on this where where it's been challenged, and there's not a lot, admittedly, but what he's found said that that commercial properties that have challenged the, ability of a blight review commission, and there are, I should say, how many 8 other towns you guys found that have commercial in their blight ordinances?
When I talked to him, he named off about 6 or 8 of them.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I was not writing them down, but those include Millwall and
Yeah.
some very large cities as well.
I mean, if you consider that not every town has a blight ordinance, but then of the ones that do, between 6 and 8.
So there's
include
some
commercial.
precedence that if we had to defend our position, we could say that there was some case. So,
Absolutely.
so
what?
there's, I don't know what the proper
Yeah.
legal terminology is, but then, so like if Connecticut's law didn't reflect that, they don't necessarily have jurisdiction over what we do as a town. The court stuff, like case law and precedence would sort of override whatever state kind of
Well, it doesn't,
statute there is.
it doesn't override, the statutes,
Like,
which
I
was
don't
more,
know
but
the legal
the
terms, right.
courts interpret the statutes.
Okay.
So what we're saying is that there's case law out there where courts have said it's okay to have, yes, we're gonna enforce your blight ordinances
Okay.
on commercial properties.
Regardless as to what the
Regardless
statute
of what the
is.
statute says currently, because it's, yes.
Why do you need a statute?
Well, we have to have a statute.
No, what, Connecticut?
Connecticut has to have all of the authority the town has to regulate anything comes from the state.
Oh.
So the state has to tell us that you can regulate it. But they don't, there's a lot of room for interpretation. in there.
Okay. Thank
So that's where we're in that room for interpretation area.
I got it.
Just generally, just wondering, do commercial properties, are they held to a certain standard in terms of vacant properties, in terms of like how often they have to clean up or mow or whatever they?
Currently, or if this is
Just,
passed?
I know like private property, like residents, no, but like a commercial property, if it's vacant currently, are they held to a certain standard in terms of what they need to do to maintain their property?
Not unless this is passed. I mean, that's sort of the point of this,
Okay.
is that the idea is that right now, a private property owner can, without this, before we had an ordinance at all, a private residential property owner could just let their house fall into ruin. And with the exception of, sort of housing safety and the fire marshal saying it's not safe to live in the house, and somebody could live there anyway, even though it's been marked as unsafe, there was no way for the town to sort of say, look, you gotta clean up your property. And that is still true for commercial property. So if a commercial property just is vacant and, I think of, actually, a good example I would say was that's probably going back too far, but where Maplewood is now. There was this old abandoned hospital on that lot that I always remember had its awning like this for years. And, but there was nothing anyone could do about that. And I remember that one because I worked on that. When Maplewood put their plans for it, everybody's like, I don't care what you do, just fix that freaking awning. So, so those are the sort of things that happen with the blight review board. And I think the important thing, what I was going to say is that, why it was helpful that George sort of went through the process is that it is a very slow process to the annoyance of some people, but it is a very slow process to go through the review. And if they're going to be doing this with commercial properties, it's not as if the RTM approves this change, that like 2 days from now they're going to start fining any commercial property in town. They're still going to go through all the steps in the process. But if we don't add commercial, there is no way to go to these commercial properties and say, hey, this is not the way we want the town to look.
Is there a cost?
To adding commercial, no, there is a blight review officer who's an employee of the town, but
Like, are you
that's,
going to add somebody new or?
they did not indicate
There
to
are
us.
so few, I was on the committee for 3 years, 2 or 3 years. There are very few, and this is when it was just residential anyway, very few actual cases at a given time. You know, there's probably a dozen or so, but they have been active for years. It's not as though there are a dozen fresh ones each time. It is a very slow process. It's a very cumbersome process. My concern about the commercial one, and I'm actually struggling with supporting it, only because of, I feel that they're very different. The residential is almost a social and help, a social services issue as much as it is an aesthetic or architectural, or certainly it's not life safety, that's covered elsewhere. And I really didn't expect that when I was on Blight, to realize that was such a big, huge piece of it. And it's really every aspect of the discussion was, have we offered them enough support? Have we given them people to clean up the mess for them? Have we offered for the town employees to go over there and clear something? I mean, so it's not, at least it wasn't for me, I don't want to speak for others, it's not what you think the process is, at least not what I did. It is very much a complicated, and again, Health and Social Services has somebody on the committee, include their administrator, I mean, their employee who runs it is part of the group, and she really drive how the Blight Committee, I shouldn't say we now, how the Blight Committee acts on these things, and it's a very slow process intentionally to give people opportunity. It's not designed, even the fee structure is really not in place to be punitive, it's to just, in some cases, get people to pay attention, and the fees are, the process could go on years before fees are assessed. So I think when I see that and then compare it to the process, what it would be like for a commercial property, I see them as being wholly different, even though the work that Frank and his committee have done is exactly right in terms of the language that's in there. But the process for the committee seems so incredibly different to me that I struggle with it a little bit. And I guess the one thing that I heard tonight for the first time, which I didn't realize, and maybe that I should have, is the fee structure, or the fine structure would be the same. And I'm not sure I think that makes sense. When I think about the residential blight candidates or whatever, the owners that are brought before the group, 90% of them are in difficult financial situations. It's not because they're doing something to be difficult. Yes, there are a couple that are, there's no question. But but it will be very different on the commercial side. So
So do you
if I-
think
I
it
also
should be
think-
faster process for commercial?
It could be, but I'm more concerned, Priscilla, about the fee structure. So let's just say that people were concerned for the last year or two or whatever that nothing was happening at the Palmer site, and that it was a blight, potential blight. I'm sure if this were in place, someone would have raised it as a blight. So let's just use that as a fairly random example. Would it have mattered if there was a $100 a day fee to that property owner or developer? I
I
don't think it would.
I think the issue is that commercial, for residential, it's embarrassing. If someone comes to you as a private homeowner and said, it's more of like maybe a cry for help too, like there's
Yeah, no, it
something
very much
going on
is.
in the home, is what you
Very
said.
much so.
It's not as punitive, and a fee is something that is never really gonna get assessed, where a commercial area, commercial establishment's not gonna listen to that fee, and they don't really care about the embarrassment of it, so it's a
Yeah,
very
I-
The
good
change
thing.
is useless because it's not enforceable,
Yeah.
because you don't have, it's not getting back there.
On the flip side, it's always a flip side. I attended the last two blight review board meetings, to make sure we're up to date on things. And when I looked at the list of open cases, some of them are historic, going back, because they've got a stubborn owner who just got a fight, and they've got a lien on the property, because when these fines are not paid, then a lien goes on, which is superior to. And the liens now are about $35,000, $40,000.
But I don't know that.
So
Sorry.
it's not so much an embarrassment of the property owner, it's the absentee property owner. So I looked at the list of probably about a dozen that are open at the moment. Many of them the status is certified letter not received. You know, a marshal has been sent out to try to find the
That's
person.
all right, that's
And
exactly right.
so I'd say half of the ones. Nobody's embarrassed because they can't find anybody.
Yeah.
The
But-
other part of it is that the $100 for a party who's really dug in and fighting this, $100 just now is up to the $30,000 and $40,000. As far as the corporation, there will be somebody there, there should be somebody there to receive a letter and deal with the board. Because there are several check stops in the process where they're invited to talk to the board, and they're invited to come in. And one feeling is when it was decided to, was recommended to just leave it at $100, is that you could put $500 for some of these scofflaws, that is not gonna help. So we just leave it consistent, and the $200 special penalty was viewed as not having any particular effect on the corporation.
But it's also just to get it recognized on the commercial side. Right, I understand they're completely different animals on the residential side versus commercial side, but we started out by saying, hey, blight is there to get this recognized, that you put them on notice that it's there. The fact is that if they're on notice of commercial property, at least they have to answer to it, and at least we can address the falling, you know, awning, right? I'm just saying, you know, this is a problem, you know, fix it, or you get the, yeah, they could care less about the $100, but at least it's an opportunity for us to address that with them, and simple as that. So I don't see it as big of a problem. I think you have two different, you're right, there's gonna be two different animals. The residential side is a lot more social than what's happening there, but at least with the commercial, we can put them on notice.
I share the same concern. I was thinking the same thing about, you know, the you know, I don't want to call it the punitive nature of a fee, but that's kind of what it is. And yes, there's a nice long process before you even get to that point. And I think you're right. It's not the same punishment between a resident and a commercial entity that, you know, that brings in a lot more money. I feel like adding commercial, I think, is an important step, and you know, I would say we recommend that, you know, I would recommend anyway that when the blight review board, you know, if and when they take this up again for further amendments, that maybe take another look at the fee structure or some, you know.
They've been at it for a while.
Yeah, when you've seen, you know, what the differences are.
Right.
And like,
Frank, have they, you know, if they've done a survey of how big of a problem commercial is?
I think
We met with Jeremy, and we met with the four members of the board. And we collected target addresses, and another member of TGS and I went around and took a look at them. It's not likely that they'll move immediately on commercial. They know what the problems are, but they don't rise to the criteria. Let's take the example of Bertucci's restaurant. It's in transition right now, and there was some trash out in front of it. And someone was calling blight on some trash. Well, the trash got cleaned up, but it doesn't rise to the level of.
That raises an important question. Is so much is going on in this town in terms of development. I mean, look at what's going on with the building next to Dairy and Diner that's being renovated. That's been like a gym, a Greek restaurant. I don't know what it's becoming now, but buildings that are either being condemned or changed with fencing around, would those be waived from that whole process? Or, you know, let's say a big tractor and garbage
There's a
and a
number of
dumpster.
criteria. It's not just one thing. So if you
Yeah.
read the ordinance, it has to meet multiple criteria to be viewed as blight. It's not as simple as.
But also, but let me just answer,
Looks
can I
bad.
just answer the question slightly differently, which is if a building is in mid-construction or mid-demolition, then it falls, and actually maybe we shouldn't have had Jeremy leave so early, but that's when it falls under the building department and the planning and zoning department. So, for example, the planning and zoning department will tell a builder, you know, look, you got too many signs up, or you gotta clean up your site, because they're in the middle of doing inspections as they go along. So that would never fall under
So
the
there's some
blight
leeway
is,
there because
there's
it's not
there's
in our
already a
purview.
process for those.
Yeah.
Blight really is talking about the ones where nothing's happening and it is
Right.
just been abandoned. And I was actually gonna say, and sorry if I just keep talking, but to sort of to Kirk's point, I kind of like the idea of adding commercial to give the town a methodology to alert some of these property owners that there's a problem, because, you know, there are some of these residential properties, you know, they either can't find the people, they're absentee, maybe they don't even know what's going on. I think that, you know, maybe I'm being idealistic, but that could happen maybe with some of the commercial properties, that if you sort of tell them, hey, you know, if they haven't been down here in 10 years, they don't know how bad it's gotten. And that might be a way to sort of, even if it's just that first letter that sort of says, hey, we've got some concerns, at least we have some authority to raise the issue.
I think also what, I'm sorry to,
Kirk.
Kirk says is the fee is not gonna be
Yeah, it's not about
deterrent,
the fee, yeah.
but it is, hey, you gotta clean up your act here, you know,
Right.
people like, the place across from Trader Joe's, that's the one with the Japanese restaurant with all the weeds growing. Like, that's been a mess for years, I wish they would just clean up their act a little bit.
Yeah.
Every time you drive by, it looks, you know.
And this might give us a way to say something, the town, a way to say something about it.
My
Yeah,
only
Erica?
concern is not all commercial properties are created equal, in that, like, you might get, I don't know that hospital one with the awning, but like that, I'm imagining was a smaller property than the,
It's huge.
oh, it was, okay. But like, you might just have like, one of those, you know,
Yeah.
a commercial property in like a small little house that is zoned in a commercial space versus a huge shopping plaza. Like,
Little taco shop
I
that's
think
kind of
exactly,
in-
right, like, so to me, in terms of equity, like charging $100 to them versus a huge shopping center with a lot of
Right.
value to that doesn't seem, I understand it's just a tool that you're using to get these people to like address the issues, and that's a good thing, but in terms of equity of fee structure, I don't know, maybe that's something
I mean,
that,
But I
could we
think the
make
blight review, I'm sorry, I was just gonna, the blight review board is not asked for higher fees. I think, to sort of what Dan said, I think they wanna kind of feel it out a little bit, and then they may come back with a change to the fee structure. But I think if they're not asking, I don't think it makes sense for us to not recommend the change, because we don't think they
Yeah.
went far enough when they were the ones sort of with boots on the ground doing the work. At least that's at least on that one
Just a-
issue.
just
Yeah,
a-
no, I hear what
yeah,
you're saying.
yeah.
And maybe it's something to raise with them, but I
Yeah.
wouldn't, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
The Blight Review Board was 4-1 on this issue, because the points are good. I mean,
Yeah.
It's an arguable point, so I'm not on one
Yeah.
side.
Yeah.
Well, we make a
But
recommendation.
it was 4-1, and then.
I still think it's a good thing to have it as a tool, again, to address the issues, but in terms
Leaving
of,
the fine just the way it is.
we brought up the issue of equity, and I'm saying not all commercial properties
Yeah,
are
it's a
equal.
very good argument.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I don't think there's any way of solving it
Yeah.
immediately.
Sure.
There are two views,
Yeah,
and they just, the board itself said.
Okay,
leave
Let's
it
keep it
alone.
as it is.
Could we make a comment or recommendation as in our motion that we would encourage them to reconsider the fine structure for the commercial property?
Please do so.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure what the answer is, nor, and to Frank's
I
point,
don't
we
either.
shouldn't solve for it here.
Thank you for the invitation to come here this evening.
yes.
TGSNA is going to meet Tuesday, and Public Health and Safety is going to meet Wednesday. So I anticipate being here on, no, Tuesday's virtual, but Wednesday, I think they're having a meeting here. And we'll be going through the same issue with the same remedy of putting your recommendation.
Because the other thing I think about also is that, I'm thinking about, again, there are attorneys in the room and I'm not one of them, so bear with me, but, you know, when I think about, if I were a commercial owner and I were blighted and I got called out and I had a letter and all went through the process, I wonder if I might have, through my attorney, challenge it a bit by saying, well, you're charging the fines, you know, blah, 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 but the residential people, you know, get support. You know, you've offered, for this case, you've offered to have the town come do something. For this case, you've offered to have workers come do something. I'm just wondering if, I'm almost wondering if they should be two separate ordinances, but I'm not going there. I think I would be okay if we could just make the recommendation about fees, and I can support it.
Well, but I think though, this sort of, I guess maybe builds on what Erica said, is that each commercial property is different.
Mhm.
And there may be a small commercial property where the person, the owner is struggling, they don't know what to do, and
Yep.
maybe we do provide them with support where, rather than it being, you know, somebody helping them with actually moving stuff out of the house, but going to zoning and saying, can you help me find somebody to buy this property? And zoning helps them. So there may actually be a social aspect to it, even though
It could
it's
be,
commercial.
absolutely.
The wait and see argument is in 2015 and 16, when the original ordinance was crafted, we were doing it because there were several, 5 or 6. It turned out to be a lot more than that, but 5 or 6.
And some of those are still open.
Screaming incidents of neglect and neighbor anger and just everything that needed that. And so the board got right to work on that. In this case, there's a list of possible complaints. And you know, if we were to give you the addresses, then you would probably see that it's a little trash that needs to be cleared up. So there's no immediate concern, but when that history builds up, I think the various topics we're talking about this evening can come to be addressed, either the now to the fine with the criteria, or the need perhaps for a different way of looking at it. But what was very pleasing was that the 13 criteria that are used to define blight for residences are appropriate for commercial. And once we got to that point, then it became a lot more reasonable just to make the minor changes that you will see.
The Japanese restaurant they aren't in business anymore, right?
No.
No.
But
They don't Fuji, so
They're out.
in theory, that would be one.
but it's gotta get the second, I mean, it can be overgrown, but that might be the only
That's right.
criteria.
That's right.
And it doesn't meet, so it's still.
Oh, I've seen rats running that out
Oh,
there.
that's right.
Well, you can, if we pass this, then you
While
can
the
make a
restaurant was
recommendation,
operating,
yeah.
I don't, that's not one of the 13.
So what you can do is drive around for
What-
2 cheese
what are the
and
other-
mix with
I mean-
wheat, or go around behind Trader Joe's, which is one of the locations.
Yeah.
And wouldn't you know it, the day we went there, clean as a whistle.
Do
What
we
are the
know,
13 things that?
It was on the
It's in
list.
there.
it's on
It's
the
in
list.
the list,
do
yes.
we know, you mentioned that you mentioned there was maybe 6 or 8 other towns that have added commercial.
Yes.
Do we happen to know if they have a different fee structure for residential versus commercial? I mean, you know, as opposed to, you know, reinventing the wheel,
Right.
find out what they may be doing.
I'm sorry, we did not put time into doing that.
No, that's fine, I just,
Well, yeah, that would be
just
up
the
to
thought.
Committee to do, not for TGS&A
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I think really what it came down to, I think perhaps Michael's point is the best one, is to recommend to Blake that they reconsider it, because
I like that.
Just
TGSA
reconsider.
wasn't gonna put the time into it if it wasn't a request from them. Yeah.
No, exactly.
Yeah. It's not that they have to, but just, I think it's worth for them, regardless if it wasn't unanimous, to your point, Frank, for them to hear that others questioned it as well. I don't think there's any harm to that. So it gives them the approval to move ahead, which is what they need.
Okay.
So do you wanna make the motion including your recommendation?
Yes,
Okay,
I'll do
go
that.
ahead. Do you wanna say it again, or do
We'll
you
say it again. That we vote to, that PZ&H committee votes to support the changes to adding commercial to the existing blight ordinance, and respectfully asks the committee to reconsider the fine structure relative to, or regarding commercial relative to what is charged, what is assessed for residential.
And when he's, and that's the blight review
Yeah.
board
Yes.
that we're asking to reconsider. Yeah, okay.
Since, yes.
I second.
Yeah, second.
Okay, all in favor?
All right.
I,
All right. Did you, was that a no, any no's?
Yeah, I'll just abstain. I don't know.
Abstain?
I don't know.
Okay.
I sort of feel like commercial, I feel like it just takes a different amount of time to deal with these properties sometimes, and they're harder to sell. And, like, I remember I moved into town, and like, there was a Howard Johnson's that was there for a long time.
they tried to paint the roof brown.
Yes, I remember
and
that.
the orange came through.
But I
It was
just
a
feel
nice
like,
look.
I feel like it's different than just a house. I feel like these properties take longer to deal with, and so I haven't really thought.
But you prefer to abstain?
Yeah.
No? Okay, that's fine. not trying to question you, just want to make sure we're getting the vote clear.
Yeah.
One question I have is something that's actually come up in the Scouts, the ASMT, is the amount of garbage that's on our exit ramps. I know they're state-owned, but what about situations like that? Those are state-owned areas, right? So there's nothing we can do?
I mean, our first select woman has brought that up with DOT, I mean,
Exit 12
and now I'm veering into personal stories, but
Yeah,
my office building backs up onto 95, and I've actually seen DOT shoveling garbage off 95 and into Goodwise River, which then flooded my office, so it's not easy, and we can't get the DOT to clear out Goodwise River, so.
I hope you got video of that.
well, the Scouts may be there soon to do it. There's a program that's being implemented.
I don't know if they're allowed to go on, are they?
But they, well,
Yeah.
they're working at ironing out the kinks there.
I'd love it.
Right.
All right.
Certain
so-
areas that, certain are too dangerous, but.
So on that, actually very positive note, thank you.
That's
Can
good.
I have a motion to adjourn? Kurt, so, all right, I'll.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Amy.
You're all welcome.